We're going to get started for the 2 o'clock panel. Thanks for sticking around. This is the room to be in, if I may be biased. I'm Matthew Eggers. I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I lead our cybersecurity working group, just to kind of give you a feel for where I fit into the kind of the chamber, the U.S. Chamber work stream. We've got about 200 companies and associations. To really put a simple point on it, you'll typically catch me on a phone call at least every Wednesday or so, working with our companies and associations, for example, promoting a bill or opposing something like that. It's just kind of classic Washington, D.C. fare. I want to thank Monty Philpott for inviting me to be here. I appreciate that greatly. One of the things, and I'll finish and I'll turn to our panelists, is one of the things that the Chamber has taken, we think a big lead in, is trying to get out to our state and local chambers. We dub our cyber education campaign Improving Today, Protecting Tomorrow. I think it's kind of catchy, where we try to talk to businesses about the things that they should be thinking about and doing in cyber. I don't think anymore you can say to a business, hey, it's optional if you have a cyber plan, or an organization, you need to have one. You need to be doing the basics, and you need to be thinking more and more about what your post-incident response plan is, including policy, legal, PR, and political responses. So with that, let me start with the top of our list here. Suzanne Schwartz with the FDA. We've got Michael McNeil with Royal Philips, and to my left, your right, Carl Anderson with Van Scoyoc, and he also represents High Trust. And before I get into the questions, and I invite folks just to raise their hand at some point if you do have questions, I'm going to ask them, maybe starting with Michael, just to maybe do a quick 30-second self-intro about how cyber fits into your life professionally, and then we'll kick off with kind of a moderated discussion. Thank you. Michael?
Sure. Michael McNeil with Philips. Philips has responsibilities for developing products from toothbrushes and with our Sonic Care, shavers with the razor. So, and all of that is Internet of Things to a number of types of medical devices in terms of MRI, CT scanners, and telespace, PACS systems that are in ultrasound equipment, also electronic medical records as well. And so I have responsibilities for assuring and driving that product from a security perspective is developed and managed through the life cycle of not only the products but the entire infrastructure, and working within the ecosystem of where those products are with our customers to make sure that they are secure.
Thank you. Suzanne?
So thank you very much. This is Suzanne Schwartz from the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at FDA. How many people here interface at all with medical devices? How many people here are patients? I would hope everybody. So everyone interfaces with medical devices, has already, and will likely throughout their entire lifespan. My role at CDRH is the Director of Emergency Preparedness, Operations, and Medical Countermeasures. And that's a mouthful, but it really represents the center's need to be in a prepared and active posture with respect to any type of hazard, including cybersecurity related concerns. So as medical device cybersecurity issues have emerged more and more over the course of the past few years, it becomes a critical area of focus for the FDA and specifically for the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Therefore, medical device cybersecurity from a programmatic perspective, from an incident response perspective, from a policy perspective, falls within the portfolio of my program.
Thank you, Suzanne. Carl?
Thank you, Matthew. My name is Carl Anderson. I'm representing HITRUST today. HITRUST is a risk and security management company.
Carl, you may want to pull that microphone a little closer.
Focused on the healthcare industry.
Better?
In 2007, it was founded with the principle of developing a healthcare-based cyber framework that is moved from a compliance model to now a risk-based model. It incorporates many of the international standards, including NIST, including ISAO, COBIT, and the like. It also has a very active healthcare-based cyber threat exchange, the platform by which healthcare companies share incidents of compromise. And we provide a number of other programs, such as sort of cyber war games and exercises, and things based on kind of improving the overall risk management and security posture for healthcare companies.
Okay, great.
We're
Thank
happy
you.
to be here.
Thanks, Carl. So the focus here is on cyber and risk in the healthcare community. I was really excited to be invited to talk about this because I work with a lot of companies and associations, and I think typically we've seen where banks and communications providers, the energy sector, electric folks, oil and gas, transportation, are engaged heavily in cyber, meaning if you talk to some of the big companies in some of these sectors, they are very much focused on cyber, managing cyber risks to data, devices, and so forth. I think the healthcare sector's been there, and they're getting more involved. I think the thinking is we want to get you guys more involved. At least from my vantage point, I'm glad to see healthcare entities more and more involved in thinking about cyber, because if they have a bad day, that's bad for them and their business partners. And so from a threat perspective, maybe ladies first, Suzanne. So how do you guys think about threats, right, in the healthcare sector, whether to data or devices? I think there's a lot of conversation around the data, the records, but more and more I think we think about devices. How are you guys looking at that in the FDA?
So, and I think we should take a step back and first of all consider what FDA's job is in terms of regulating medical devices or regulating drugs and biologics. We approach all medical products from the standpoint of the need to protect and to advance the public health mission. And so safety of a device specifically becomes of prime importance, both the safety and effectiveness. And what we've seen, what we're experiencing really over the course of the past few years is a need to recognize that as medical devices are less and less perhaps standalone types of boxes, but they are much more interconnected systems, there's a lot of interoperability that's involved, and these are extraordinary advances in technology that we absolutely want to be able to see continue to evolve and to continue to encourage that innovation. And yet that introduces an entirely different threat into thinking about even sometimes the safety of these devices. Sure. And to that end, it really requires that the agency, as well as all of the stakeholders that are within the entire medical device ecosystem, take a somewhat different or more expansive perspective and a change in terms of how we view the potential for intrusions or for potential exploits of vulnerabilities. And so I'll stop there for right now.
No, that's great. And I was just going to say, I want to turn to Michael and maybe talk about specific threats. But just while we're on the topic about threats, when you and colleagues at the FDA think about threats, threat actors, right? Typically, we think about criminal groups, nation-state actors, others. Do you guys have kind of a handy list that you kind of think about in terms of the healthcare community and threat actors posing a threat to that sector and its companies? How do you guys think about that? Maybe Michael?
For me? Or
and then both of you. Both of you, really.
So usually when we look at our products and you look at the environments that they're going to be used, so let me just kind of do the what-if example. We know that we have products that are providing information that is being used and leveraged in diagnosis and in the treatment within certain diseases. And we want to make sure that that information obviously is as accurate of information because of the types of decisions that are being made. You also want that information to make sure it can be secure. And so there's also a new added area where you want to be able to share that information, readily. So let's say that I'm triaging, a patient, but I'd have to do consultation with someone that's not currently in the room, but we want to transmit that information for them to be able to get access to it on a particular tablet because they're consulting and it's real time and an emergency that's taking place. So you want to do your threat actors as you described, and from a risk perspective, where you try to think of the different scenarios in which that particular solution could be used. So I need to make sure I understand not only in the environment of the hospital, but in the context of any kind of networks that might transmit that information, who might have access to those particular, networks. And so we sort of go through as part of the risk and the threat actor scenarios, trying to restage what we anticipate or what the potentials would be when we're doing that type of a risk assessment. And so that's where you would typically pull in the different types of threat actors that could take place. And then you will get those that might want to actually cause harm, those that might want to access information in terms of, holding it hostage, ones that might want to do something from a nation's, state perspective in terms of collecting and manipulating a system in a particular way. But you want to create those different threat scenarios in order to make sure that you effectively are putting that into your design and in your thinking process.
So, Michael, when you guys think about threats at your company and in your industry, is it important, I hear you saying, to categorize the threat actors? Usually I think about the threat actors in terms of capability and intent, meaning what do they want to do if they get into the data or access the device. Do you guys kind of rank them? And I would say, and maybe Suzanne too, do you see a more common occurrence by a type of threat actor?
So for me, the answer is yes. We do try to score and rank based upon, level of severity, degree of skill and expertise that would be required in order to particularly manipulate that environment. We also try to, within that scoring, also have what are also mitigating and other types of controls and factors that could be put in place that would surround the service that's being offered. So from our side, the answer is yes, and we want to make sure that we are consistent from a use case perspective when I go from device or product to different devices and products.
So Suzanne, in the banking sector, they've got the money, right? Folks want to go monetize data. In the electric sector, they worry about the availability of power. In the healthcare sector, at least as respected devices, bad actors would get in there to threaten the proper functioning of a device?
So there are, as Michael pointed out, there could be a number of different drivers why someone might want to get in terms of being able to attack or get information out of the healthcare system. We certainly recognize that the exposure surface to attack for within healthcare is rather expansive, is very, very large, and particularly because of the assets that are there, whether it's personal health information, personal information that can therefore be monetized. And sometimes the device, because it's connected to part of the system, can be affected as a result of collateral damage, right? And so that's where the whole concept of doing a broad threat modeling, as Michael, representing Philips, has indicated, becomes really, really important to be able to look at all of the possible scenarios. Are we aware to date of any one entity, nation state, criminal, specifically targeting to do physical harm, to do patient harm? we're not aware, but that doesn't mean that that possibility does not exist or is not coming down the line. And that's something that we do have to be very vigilant about. One thing I'll add as an agency, because we don't ourselves do the threat modeling. What we do is working together with our other federal government partners, whether also the intelligence community, whether it's Homeland Security, whether it's other parts of HHS, whether it is DOD, everywhere where that type of information could be critical for our knowledge, as well as being able to have cross-visibility with what's happening within the other sectors because of the potential cascading or downstream consequences of something affecting one sector, therefore having an effect on the healthcare sector as well.
I want to come back to that cascading point in just a second. Carl, when you guys, not so much on just the information sharing kind of function, but when you guys at High Trust and others think about your threat picture, what's the image in your mind?
Well, every month High Trust sponsors a threat briefing that's open to the public in conjunction with HHS and partners at FDA and DHS and the FBI. And every month it kind of gives the sort of, tabletop version of what's the threat out there. It's, the pandas, the jades, the spiders, the code words out there. So a little bit of the sexy version. But I think that what in healthcare, the main threat is, patient care. Nobody wants their pharmaceuticals to be changed, the scripts that are being written, or it's really how you can change that and manipulate that system on the back end, as all the devices now, as everybody knows, are becoming, as Suzanne mentioned, more connected, more online, more susceptible to this. But certainly those things are propping up, but at the same time, the global macro level threats are the same ones we're experiencing with our partners in other sectors, such as the financial sector. It just seems that in 2015, the healthcare sector is the one that has many of the public, breaches and things like that.
Got it. People are more than welcome to ask questions. Just raise your hand and jump in. No need for no cards. Suzanne, on the cascading effects, when you guys think about partnering sectors that are kind of close in, what do you think about communications, energy, other sectors? It's always interesting to see how sectors will kind of look out there and say, folks may point at me, let's say I'm the banking sector, but I also rely on the electric sector very closely. How does the healthcare sector look at others in its kind of orbit? And Michael, too.
So because healthcare, public health is one of the critical infrastructure sectors, as is energy, as is IT, and among others, it does become important for us in real time to be aware as sector-specific agencies of potential threats or incidences or occurrences that might be already observed, or that may be a signal of something happening in one sector that could have, again, a consequence within the healthcare sector. An example to point to, I guess, also is it's not so much a threat, it was the vulnerability that was identified with regard to heart bleed. So clearly a vast vulnerability that was identified, and the implications for that across many types of systems and devices would be pretty extensive. So having information on the release of different types of vulnerabilities or having information on potential threats early on allows for communicating that information to the appropriate, whether it's the vendors, the manufacturers, as well as the end users, the hospitals, the healthcare delivery organizations, in order to be able to make sure that those occurrences are appropriately mitigated or remediated.
Okay. Michael, same kind of idea on the cascading events or just your close-in sector partners. Who do you guys think about?
So again, I think that you try to look at what's our definition in sort of the path that we're on. And I would define us as an area where you have a lot of legacy equipment and activities. You have equipment and an infrastructure that was very closed or considered to be closed, and now through the internet and through the interoperability discussions that Suzanne had just stated, opens up. You start looking at where we fit in terms of being one of the critical infrastructures. So you then start pairing similarities to energy, to SCADA, to other types of analogies that you could look at, and you want to try to maybe see the path that they were on and align with some of that information as we look and move forward within the healthcare space. So that's how we typically try to look at and try to leverage what other industries might be going through or have gone through, and then to see where there's some applicable learning. Obviously, the patient safety component, which is very critical and very broad for healthcare, sort of trumps the cards a little bit. So you can't just do everything that one industry might have done in either a financial or another sector that you would in the healthcare because of the viability of our solutions.
Got it. And in terms of medical devices, I know when we were talking before this panel, not to get too far down into the weeds, but assessing security risks to medical devices, how would you guys characterize industry's current effort to kind of get your hands around managing those risks, right? From what, production to usage in a healthcare setting? I know there's a white paper out there. FDA's done provided some pre-market draft guidance. I think if I were in DC, I would say, hey, gang, the comment period's open until October 23, that kind of thing. But how are you guys looking at it? Maybe, Suzanne, if you want to start.
Sure. So I'm going to take a step back a little
Please.
bit and talk about the fact that, again, the healthcare, public health sector has a lot of maturing to do within the area of cybersecurity that's certainly well recognized, universally recognized, as compared to especially some of the other sectors. And with that comes the need to provide, probably more than anything else, increased awareness, increased education as far as what the potential needs are for being able to do a better job at securing devices and systems. So as we at FDA have evolved over the past few years in looking at this issue as it continues again to generate not only greater awareness and momentum, it becomes that much more important for us as an agency to be able to articulate to our regulated industry, to the medical device manufacturers, as well as to the public, as well as to the healthcare delivery organizations, what are our expectations with respect to securing medical devices or building more securable, designing more securable devices. One thing also to state here is that we all should recognize that there is no such thing as a medical device that is totally vulnerability-free, that has, that is absolutely secure, that is risk-free, and that goes, really for any type of system. There's always going to be a vulnerability that's going to emerge at some time or other. So being at the, the agency's role of being at the forefront of providing what our expectations are for enabling devices as they are designed and as they are getting ready to go onto the market and are cleared or approved to go on the market, that there has been a rigorous process towards making sure to build in or bake in the security components as opposed to, as Michael alluded to before, what we have a lot of our legacy that are in place. We're bolting it on as an after the fact becomes that much more difficult, as well as at times may not even necessarily be possible in all circumstances. So from that standpoint, it's the awareness piece, it's the, educating, it's our evolving our regulatory thinking and policy, which we have been engaged in. And the one last point that I wanted to emphasize, which was underscored as a critical theme this morning, the partnerships, the collaboration piece. A lot of this is about it's really about the people and the culture that will enable the technologies as well. But we have to do a really great job at being able to make sure that everyone who has a stake within this space really has an understanding of what they can contribute, the skills, the knowledge, the expertise that they contribute, because no one organization or entity or agency or private company solely owns this particular issue.
I would 100% agree with you there. Yes, sir.
I think we focused on devices on the other end, but this is a much harder problem. Healthcare is people rich. The number of people that are touched the sensitive data is much higher than financial and other sectors. And also, it's a very exceptional rich environment. Get around, break the laws, whatever it is. So, what is being done to educate people in the medical ecosystem about this? I think we can all have nothing to do with devices, but just an example, my daughter is a medical student, and they got an emergency email saying, there's a celebrity patient, you're not supposed to look at her medical record. And I was saying, why on earth would medical students actually be able to look at somebody's medical record when they're not doing anything with their patient? I found out that any doctor can access any medical record.
Right.
So I think the device end maybe is not the most difficult problem. It's the people and the. So I don't
Let me
know
off the hook.
if you have experience with that, but your problem is much harder.
I'll start off by commenting. As far as the electronic...
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start off by saying that it's a huge, complex problem. The devices is a critical piece that FDA has responsibility for. We don't have authority or jurisdiction over electronic health records, so maybe I'm off the hook a little bit here from FDA's perspective, but recognizing that it is, again, all interoperable or interconnected, where you have data that's being transmitted at times from a device that's going into the electronic health record, or data that can be interceded, and the integrity of that data can be manipulated, that becomes a concern, especially if an intervention is going to be based upon that data. The point that you raise with regard to educating within the workforce, and particularly the health professionals, those who are boots on the ground, working with patients, working with electronic health records, is absolutely key. That point resonates with all of us here. That's one that, for me as a physician myself, be the one leading the banner there in terms of the need to do a better job at educating. And I recognize that that's an area of gap. That's one of the reasons that we're here, because we're really very interested in developing the kinds of also partnerships or looking at what kind of out-of-the-box educational activities and curriculum and programming can be developed to address this issue with regard to awareness, education, being better informed, whether it's on, again, the electronic health records issue and securing that information, as well as, the devices also.
Is there a question up here? Thank you.
As a follow-up directly, I had the question anyway, but I actually am developing a cybersecurity minor for healthcare management. I come from the computer science cybersecurity arena, and I think the next step is interdisciplinary. And however, right now it's the twinkle in my eye, and I don't really know what. So, if you were going to do this, what in your dream world, what would these? To be clear, it's the minors available for business, healthcare. It's eventually going to be cyber for all, we call it, but eventually it's going to be. Currently, it's business, healthcare, and criminal justice. But what I would ask you is, what would you like to see healthcare management, somebody who's majoring in healthcare management, what type of skills would you like to see added for security?
Earl, do you want to take a stab at that? I want to get you in. Anything?
Not an academic.
Michael or Suzanne?
I mean, I think it plays a little bit earlier on the last keynote in terms of that problem solving, obviously individuals, and having them think about critically the different scenarios, and individuals from a background and or what you want to accomplish, looking at different facets that cyber could come into play in that specific environments that we're talking about. So if I'm hospital management, what do I interact with in terms of not only the information, but the transport of that information, how that information can be either managed or manipulated, or security of that information. Those individuals with either that background or the ability to put together the appropriate types of assessments from that critical thinking, to me, would be what I would like to see as a component in it. We kind of smiled to build on this whole little topic, because when we were meeting earlier, similar to the question, I have my daughter is in her second year residency, and I can talk with her about why I'm coming here and part of the discussion. I guarantee you, with her graduating, with her her MD and now focus in emergency medicine, that none of this topic was a part of any of her training or background when she went through every different department and had to have all of the different rotations within the hospital system and into any other types of being a caregiver. This just was not a component of the discussion. And I can also tell you that they are sitting there, and she's immediately, and others, taking pictures and there's passing information in order to do the examples that I gave you. So I know that it's happening, but I know that the security of that and the access points to the information from a cyber perspective is not a part of the DNA within at least the healthcare and in the entire infrastructure. So one, there's an awareness component, and then two, I think there's a component that everyone should get from that healthcare and from a management perspective. Then I think you move into those that have to touch and have to have more position-specific access to information and how they manage it, that it needs to be the next level of drill down, is how I would recommend and would suggest we tailor who should get what and to what level of the types of information that they need to be aware of within their development process.
Michael, thank you. Carl, did you want to jump in on that? Please.
Just to sort of piggyback on what Suzanne and Michael were saying, building into the DNA, or really getting at the root cause of changing the culture. You found in the nuclear industry, it was mentioned 3 Mile Island in the prior speaker. I mean, that was a sea change. We haven't, and that changed the whole energy industry's culture. We haven't had that yet in the medical community. Right now, it's only been patient records, or it's only been, financial or personally identifiable information. It hasn't been a loss of life that we know of. What HITRUST has been doing, we've kind of started a working group that deals with EHRs and medical devices in trying to identify how would you go about sharing vulnerabilities in this sort of safe space among manufacturers, among possibly regulators, in a way to elevate the playing field with the rising tides lift all boats mentality. And we're still working through some of that. But also one of those components, I think, is to kind of adopt a set of best practices that manufacturers and the end users, so that the nursing professionals, the medical professionals who are engaging, looking at the CT scans, using the CT scanner, wheeling the patient over and identifying that that is the right person going through the tube, all understand that this is a part, they're playing a part in this. And so what we're trying to develop is a code of conduct that not only the manufacturers will begin to do in baking in the vulnerability from the ground up, rather than having it as a latch on, but then also have the professionals who are using these machines and devices to do that. But it also goes back to the patients. The patients, what we've found in many of our studies and just sort of kind of anecdotes. Are you more concerned with your child when you go into a pediatric hospital coming out cured or less sick, or are you worried about that the doctor was saying his name in the ER as you're walking down, but because technically calling out a patient's name is you're not respecting their privacy? Hands down, 99% of the time, the parents say that we're concerned with the safety of our child and the privacy sort of be darned.
So I want to turn to information sharing in this space. The gentleman up here, I think, made the point that we were kind of started off talking about medical devices, but he might prioritize maybe the targets of a cyber incident maybe a little differently, maybe the patient data, and then the professor, I think, from Towson University. So you were asking about kind of a curriculum, and I think that's pretty key. I would be interested to kind of sit through the Augusta University's efforts when they are developing, if not already, kind of that intersection between what they're doing at the Cyber Institute and their work in the area of medicine and so forth. So it sounded as if you're looking for, and I think we answered the question. I think Michael and Suzanne and others suggested some basics around cyber, very much like, I'm blanking on her name, the lady from the CIA talked about basics of information, right, security, protecting information networks and systems, and then maybe some specific things tailored to a medical program. I think that's probably what you're going after.
What I'm thinking is that some of the same key principles in computer science cybersecurity can, privacy, risk,
Right.
these same things can apply, and I'd like to know if you agree with me, and then I'd like to know if there's additional topics that you would come to mind as a number. I need specifics. I mean, what would I, like in these curriculum, in these courses, what would you like to see these professionals have?
So I would ask first another question back to you in terms of who are the targeted students here, because I think that to a great extent, that determines what the curriculum looks like. And what I mean by that, as an example, the whole area of, for example, of incident response, cyber incident response within a hospital setting is not one that really, from a clinician, from a clinical professional standpoint, has been addressed at all. I am not aware, and we do go around and speak about this a lot, I'm not aware of any hospital healthcare organization to date where nurses and physicians or physician's assistants, so in other words, all the allied, all of the healthcare professionals, those who are interacting with patients, have any understanding of what they would do if they were to encounter an actual cyber incident that was affecting, that in real time was affecting patient care. I'm not even sure that they would have enough awareness and education to recognize that that's what's happening and that they need to make further calls for help. So that's a little bit different than perhaps what you're talking about, but that gets to the issue of tailoring the type of educational or curriculum needs based upon what the primary function or role is of the individual within an organization. Devices all of a sudden becoming bricked and not being able to use them, and patients are on them or they're connected up to them, what are you supposed to do? Does the resident know what to do? Does the attending know what to do? Does the nurse know what to do? Do they know how to interpret that situation? So it's interesting. This points to what Carl was saying before, that it took something as a nuclear accident to really to invoke that kind of a sea change. And we saw similar things happen after 9/11, where that's when hospital preparedness programs really went into effect, and that there was a lot of focus on making sure that hospital staff know how to react and how to respond in the event of some type of big disaster or crisis that exists for the physical. It does not right now exist for cyber. So that's an area that certainly needs some education.
Can I come back to your
She has a.
Oh,
she's
yes.
been dying to.
Susan.
I've been here forever. One of the questions that I have is, you've talked about the hospital industry or healthcare not being highly regulated in that way, but there's ICD-10 codes that every clinician knows about. There's meaningful use that most of the folks involved with medical records are very familiar with, and then there's HIPAA requirements that you were just referring to right there that even patients are aware of, and so there's an infrastructure of regulation around privacy, around cyber and how to use it at the bedside, and how to get billed for it. And I think that a lot of providers understand very clearly what they must do from a cyber perspective to be compensated appropriately. So, are there and maybe the question should go to someone at HHS. I'm interested to know, are those conversations that are being had about how we take the existing rails that we have going into the healthcare community, how we take those existing regulations and tweak them to overlay a cyber component? Are there requirements being discussed in meaningful use or in ICD-10 as it gets implemented, and hopefully 11 and 12, to implement some cyber security into those?
Susan, are you kind of getting at trying to harmonize a number of regs out there into a kind of a single whole? Is that the way you're thinking about it?
Well, I think the healthcare community is very focused on changing their billing codes and getting incentives to upgrade their medical records, and I think that those are opportunities with a little bit of education and awareness to add in a cyber assurance.
You know, I might just add in there, I'm with the U.S. Chamber. We tend to be a little allergic to the regulatory kind of mode, where I think more regulations aren't necessarily more, but I think taking maybe Susan's question and running with it, how are you viewing the role of the regulator and the plethora of regulations already in place?
Well, so let me just answer to Susan as well that I might not have been clear in terms of stating that FDA does not regulate hospitals and electronic health records. That's not to say that there aren't regulations that are in place through HIPAA, the privacy rule, which really falls under another part of HHS through Office of Civil Rights. And a lot of the coordination that's happening within this space is through what's called Office of National Coordinator for Health IT, ONC for Health IT, which is also part of HHS. And that's where meaningful use, interoperability roadmap, all of those elements and recommendations and guidance would be coming out from. CMS clearly involved as well from reimbursement standpoint, but where I would say, at least from the perspective that we have seen, I don't know that I would agree that practitioners have a really, really good sense of awareness with regard to security issues. Perhaps on the HIPAA privacy side, but when it comes to security, that's where there's still a gap area where there's a greater need for knowledge, education, and I really can't speak to, whether there is a need for further regulation there on that piece of it. But certainly the practices, some of the behaviors that we hear about it, that we've become aware of through speaking to different practitioners, would indicate that there really isn't sufficient knowledge out there as to what the risks are and what the threats are and what one can do, what best practices, what good cyber hygiene is in terms of really reducing those kinds of risks.
Thank you. Michael, I want to turn to information sharing. Did you want to add a point on there or anything to Susan's question?
So, again, I think that, overall, if there's an opportunity to enhance existing either regulation rules or tweaking them so that they do take into account the cyber piece, I'm all for that, long as it doesn't derail what is currently there or, sort of act as if it's a bolt-on, because we've seen that and it becomes very difficult to adhere to, whether or not you're the clinicians and others that's in the space that you're talking about. So, but I think from that perspective, it would be very good. In regards to some of the information and from a sharing perspective, kind of circling you back, I do think that, again, Suzanne talks about it, and I speak, and others around the fact that the more that we can get the ecosystem of all of the constituents around the table aligned, and whether or not it's code of practices or what it needs to be, we need to get that alignment of the constituents at the table and defining where appropriately and how information could be shared and how it could be accessed. And so I know that the more that we bring in the ecosystem and the constituents of manufacturers, the health delivery networks and hospitals, the regulators, even those that are doing the research, and the constituents that are hacking and very active from a cyber perspective involved, and get to some kind of common ability of sharing information and the appropriate taxonomies of what makes sense and where regulation plays into what is discovered and what the next steps would be. All of that being defined, for me equals information sharing and moving us in the right direction.
I'm going to come back to that point about kind of a public-private partnership. I know that the Chamber and many other organizations work very closely with NIST on building the cyber framework for critical infrastructure. I want to come back to maybe the issue if there's a consensus about if there's a public-private group kind of doing exactly what you're saying, Michael, but I want to turn to info sharing because I want to hit on a couple more topics before 3. If anybody's got a question, just raise their hand. So I think it was back in June in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about the former CIO at the Mayo Clinic, noting that I think in response to some cyber incidents, they put together an intelligence group related to share information, but I think that was largely internal. And I know, Carl, your group and others, you're looking at sharing threat data across companies, entities. How do you see that, the role of information sharing bodies as in terms of playing a role in improving security? And what kinds of things do you guys think you need for your constituents to do a better job in terms of what they're doing?
Well, sure. Healthcare specifically has, and we've alluded to this, either a capability or a maturity kind of issue going on. There's a 430,000 what are determined healthcare entities. That's everything from a sole practicing, physician to your large United Healthcare insurer payer company. Mm-hmm. And so there's a great capability there and a great maturity there. But in terms of information sharing and sharing the indicators of compromise, we have a platform called the CTX, our Cyber Threat Exchange. We have 1,100 practicing and using members of that. And so within there's some challenges, not only to get folks to contribute based on the sort of limited liability protection we're afforded under just sort of the basic private user agreements. And mm-hmm. so we're actively advocating for, the information sharing cyber bills that are out there, both in the House and the Senate, to sort of provide our members, the insurers, the hospitals, the pharmaceutical companies or medical device manufacturers sharing these indicators in near real time they can with a certain amount of liability protection, given the fact that, at the time they're sharing that information, they don't know if they're breached. It could be revealed 60 days later. They may be, it's a canary in the coal mine for some of this stuff, but in the interest of sort of the good of the order or the good of the industry, they want to share sort of as in real time as they can. To give an example, and not to monopolize all the time that we have left. But Anthem, they self-identified their indicator of their big breach back in January on a Tuesday. By Tuesday night, they had isolated it in their system. The FBI was rolling in their forensic teams. The next Wednesday, they were trying to isolate what the indicators were. And by Thursday, they were able to patch it and do their internal things and continue their operations. But they were able to share things with HITRUST, the small template of the indicators, which then HITRUST was able to do their scrubbing internally and then share with US CERT and their members. So within about then 48 hours, the whole industry was able to do that. They didn't make the announcement of the breach until 7 days later, and they didn't even have an obligation under HIPAA for another 60 days to make those decisions. So that was one example of a company kind of doing the right thing, but many companies aren't thinking that way, and many companies are leery of doing that. And many of the other healthcare breaches, you're not even finding out in the media. You're finding out in the quarterly 10K that there was a breach because that's what the SEC requires you to do. So in some ways, it goes back to the culture, but in a lot of ways, there is some regulatory issues going on.
I will say, in my experience in terms of that incident, Anthem is a member of ours, and I will say my impression is that they did reach out to us after they were discovered, I think, a breach by, I think, likely China. And one of the things I think they did well that I think is a lesson for other organizations is they kind of knew what their game plan was, meaning I think they had their hands on the wheel at 10-2 where they were demonstrating, I think, control. They knew who in the White House to call. They knew who in Capitol Hill to call. They had a media outreach plan, meaning those are sort of some later stages in my mind of a company that, and we want companies to be thinking this way so they don't have bad days from a cyber standpoint. They'd been thinking about it well in advance, so when that bad day happened, they just relatively needed to flip a switch. And I think if there's anything we are trying to get our companies to think about is be that well positioned too for the benefit of your company, your stakeholders, your customers, and so forth. I want to talk about maybe quickly board senior managers of organizations in the healthcare sector. I think I just saw a PwC study the other day that suggested that 91% of organizations are using elements of the NIST framework, even though the NIST folks don't like to say NIST framework. They like to say that it's been developed by the private sector, which I think will take.
Guidance.
Yes, guidance. And so from your vantage point, boards, senior directors of organizations, do you think that they are tracking this issue, making it a priority at the board level? Maybe Michael?
I believe definitely so. I mean, I can speak from firsthand advantage points where previous two organizations that I've worked with and currently work at, it is one of the top enterprise risks that is tracked and communicated to either quality and development arms or the audit committees within these organizations. And so, and in speaking with my colleagues, I see it being, very similar as well. So from our perspective, I know that the cybersecurity and the space in and of itself, for at least within the manufacturers and the solution sets, those organizations, it has gained that visibility and traction, and I can only see it sustaining and growing larger among other organizations.
One thing I wanted to come back to, because I think this is, at least in my experience working with our companies and with policymakers, is it seems as if we tend to see better outcomes, meaning companies aren't frustrated by potential regulations and agencies, departments feel like they are carrying out their mission, where companies, associations, and agencies will kind of sit across the table from one another and kind of work through a problem rather than, let's say, jumping right to a Federal Register notice where we've got a regulatory something in the works. At least that's been my experience. Do we have that kind of public-private group out there forming to tackle these issues? Maybe there is, I think, for the good of the order, or is that still kind of in fruition?
So I think that from the outreach that the FDA did this time last year in the workshop and pulling all of the constituents together was that catalyst. Okay. And you saw a number of different entities because of that taking action and next steps. So either coming together appropriately or within their own, consortiums and jurisdictions, you still have seen a lot of action taking place. And I can speak to that because I spend a lot of time with Suzanne and others around this topic. And, from high trust to the medical device innovation and safety and security to NHISAC to there's a number of activities now from within in less than a year that has been up and working and trying to bring, all of different constituents to the table.
And maybe if I could close here, coming up on 3, is there a role for an institution like GRU to get involved? They probably are, but if not, what would that maybe look like if they so choose to do so?
Oh, no, I definitely there's a role from a GRU perspective, because number one, as you talked about, I think there's this big role around that training and awareness and the education piece that needs to be pulled in. And the sooner, because we're dealing a lot with what's currently out there in the market in terms of products and services in the hospitals and in those environments. And so the more that the education piece and the awareness, on the front end, we really haven't been having appropriate constituents, from a focus perspective. I'll say that there are pockets only because there are organizations aligned to some of the other universities in healthcare that have sort of a focus around cyber and some of the threat landscapes. And so, for example, we clearly have someone like Kevin Fu, who is participating in a part of the discussion pieces at University of Michigan and is established, kind of moved his Archimedes group, from the Boston area and when he was there to Michigan. And so there are other pockets, but again, clearly we're not seeing a very good systemic focus on that front end with the education. And we've been commenting that we really do need to see that collaboration, I think, be a part of the process.
I think that's probably the great thing about what I think GRU is trying to do, at least in this space. And Suzanne? Yeah, no, I wanted to add to that and further, in echoing Michael's remarks, that number one, I found participating or listening this morning was very energizing in that regard, because it really gets to the great need, the knowledge gaps, the skills gaps that are out there, that there is absolutely a focus that's needed in generating the future workforce that's going to be able to understand the needs within specifically the healthcare sector so what does that mean from a cybersecurity perspective? What does that mean from an engineering perspective? What does that mean from a medical or clinical perspective? Mm-hmm. The confluence of that has extraordinary relevance for us at the agency, and I would say for the private sector as well, in the design of new products. There is no one really who possesses that total expertise. Would love to see that fostered, and that's where there's opportunity for great partnership with universities. Thank you. I want to acknowledge that maybe we'll steal another minute or two from the break networking session. I just wanted to see if there's a last-minute question. Thanks, everybody, for hanging in there for an hour. I think this was a great panel. I personally learned a lot. Thank you. Maybe we'll give Michael, Suzanne, and Carl a last word.
Thank you.